Now let's have an application of the laws of motion. So last time we have discussed about the concepts of the 3 laws of motion. So when we talk about the first law of motion, that is actually the description on what will happen when there is no net force acting on our object. So summation of forces is equal to 0 Newton. There is no net force, 0. So remember that summation, this net force is actually the vector sum. Okay, so we can divide this into 2. We have summation of forces along the x should be 0 Newton, and also summation of forces along the y should be 0 Newton, because net force is actually the vector sum of our the vector sum of the forces. Okay, so this is the first law of motion, and this is what we call translational equilibrium. First law of motion talks about equilibrium. That means there is no net force. Equal, di ba? Equilibrant, katong nakakuha mo sa vectors na itong discussion. Now, the second law of motion, this is the law of acceleration, and the net force is actually mass times acceleration. So it could also be the net force along the x should be ma if there is acceleration along the x. And if there is an acceleration along the y, then summation of forces along the y should be ma if there is net force along the y. So this is the second law of motion. Now this equation is the third law of motion, and it only tells us that each object will exert an equal but oppositely directed reaction on the other when two objects interact with each other. Ito lang siguro yung pinakamadali, no? Equal lang man sila, equal lang man ang forces acting on them. So let's have first the problems regarding equilibrium or first law of motion. So the first 3 problems that I will give you is about equilibrium, is about the first law of motion. And then the next 3 problems is about the second law of motion, or the law of acceleration. And then the last problem will be about the law of interaction. Okay, so let's start. A block of wood weighing 12.5 kilograms is lying on a rough horizontal surface. A. What is the force exerted by the surface on the block? B. What is the maximum horizontal force needed to overcome the force due to friction, where the coefficient of static friction is 0.20? So again, the very first step when we solve problems in physics is to draw our free body diagram. So let us identify what are the forces present on this problem. Ano-ano ba yung mga forces present in this problem? First, we have, of course, we have the force due to gravity, the weight of our object. Okay? The weight of our object, which is always directed downwards, straight downwards. Dapat straight, no? Yan, straight downwards. This is the weight of our object. Ano pa yung forces acting on this object? We have a surface. So that means there is a normal force exerted by that surface. Tama? So kapag may surface, may normal force man yan. And that normal force is always perpendicular to the surface, Fn. Okay? Now, there is a force due to friction. Bakit? Kailan natin malalaman na there is force due to friction? Kapag mayroong given na coefficient, or kapag ang tinatanong coefficient, of course, then there will be frictional force. Wala lang frictional force kapag naka-state sa problem na frictionless. So kapag frictionless, of course, wag mong ilagay si frictional force. Now, since there is a coefficient, then that would mean that there is a frictional force. So it's up to you kung saan nyo directed ang frictional force. To the left ba or to the right? Wala kasing nakalagay kung saan siya i-push. So it is to the, for example, to the left sa akin, ito yung frictional force. It is always parallel to the surface, tama? Yan. So ano yung tinatanong dito? Let us identify what are the required variables sa ating problem. Unang required. What is the force exerted by the surface on the black surface? This is actually Fn. Kapag yan ang tinatanong, exerted by the surface. So for letter A, we are talking about the Fn, the normal force. Now for letter B, what is the maximum horizontal force needed to overcome the force due to static friction? So you need to overcome the force due to static friction. So how are you going to overcome this force, this frictional force? So you must apply, tama? You must apply a force in the opposite direction. So this is actually about FA, the maximum horizontal force needed to overcome the force due to static friction. So we are asked about the applied force. Ayun. Okay? So tapos na tayo dito. So let us identify on which axis itong dalawang forces. Anong axis ba si normal force? Si normal force is along the y-axis. So isulat natin dito para hindi tayo malito. Along the y-axis. And then si applied force is along the x-axis. So let's proceed with the solution. Yeah. Anong color? Black na lang mo, black. So let's start with letter A. It is Fn, which is along the y-axis. So we will use the equation, summation of forces along the y should be what? 0 Newton. Bakit 0 and not ma? Because there is no acceleration. So that means 0 Newton. Kasi wala namang acceleration along the y. Now, what are the forces along the y? We have Fn, yan, and we also have weight. So Fn is upward, so it should be positive. Positive Fn plus, what is our weight? It is downwards, so it is negative. Weight is negative because it is always directed downwards. Must be equal to 0 Newton. And what are we looking for? We are looking for the Fn. So transpose natin si weight doon sa other side of the equation. So that means Fn is equal to the weight. Ito yung sabi ko last time na kapag horizontal surface, Fn is equal to the weight. Ito yung explanation kung bakit equal si normal force at saka si weight. And weight, we all know that weight is mg. Okay? So let us substitute all the values. What is our mass? Hindi ko pala nasulat, no? Ang given. Kalimutan ko isulat ang given. Dito na lang isulat ang given. Mass is 12.5 kilograms. And then ano pa yung given natin? Dara. Coefficient of static friction is 0.20. Kalimutan ko pala isulat. So mass is 12.5 kilograms. 5 kilograms. Times the acceleration due to gravity is 9.81 meters per second squared. Huwag na lagyan ng negative. And that will give us 12.5 times 9.81. That will give us 122. 122.625. 625. Unit of force is Newton. Now take note of the number of significant figures. We need 3 significant figures. So that means our final answer should have 3 significant figures. So Fn is equal to 123 Newton. This is our final answer for the normal force, 123 Newton. Now, let's proceed with letter B. Ano yung hinahanap natin sa letter B? We're asked about the applied force. And we know that applied force is along the x-axis. So that means we will use the equation summation of forces along the x should be, is there an acceleration along the x? No, there is no acceleration because there is no mention of acceleration in the problem. So if there is no acceleration, 0 Newton. So what are the forces along the x? Along the x-axis, we have Fa, positive, because it is on the right. Fa plus, ano pa? FF, or the frictional force, which is to the left, so it should be negative. Negative FF should be 0 Newton. Now, we are looking for FA, so transpose FF on the other side of the equation. So FA is equal to FF. FA is equal to FF. Ano nga yung equation natin for FF? Remember pa yung equation for FF? FF is equal to mu S Fn, right? Yan yung example natin last time. So this is just equal to mu S Fn. Let us substitute all the variables. What is our mu S? Our mu S is 0.20 times. What is our Fn? 123. It's up to you kung anong gagamitin mo na value. Yung ito or ito. Ito na sa ating 123. Three significant figures. 123 Newton. And that will give us 123 times 0.20. That will give us 24.6 Newton. How many significant figures? We only need two significant figures. So our final answer should only contain two significant figures. FA is equal to 25 Newton. Get it? Very good. So that's for problem number 1.